There have been some strange Jedi over the years, from Oppo Rensesis in Episode 1 to Oppo Rensesis in Episode 2, and even Oppo Rensesis in the Clone Wars. There's also Beldorian the Hutt Jedi, and that's just the ones shaped like snakes. But years before the internet lost their minds over the introduction of Geode in the High Republic, there was a sect of Jedi made up of 4 sensitive rocks called the Iron Knights. The Iron Knights belong to a species called the Shard, which originated on the planet Orax, a clear reference to borax. They were introduced in Star Wars Adventure Journal number 15, which explained that they lived in clusters on their homeworld with something of a group consciousness, thanks to their communication being mostly done through electromagnetic waves in the atmosphere. They were immobile, but because they were rocks, they also tended to live for thousands of years, and their immobility led to a growing sense of wanderlust in some of them. Many others frowned upon this unorthodox yearning, at least metaphorically, since they weren't capable of actually frowning. But about 100 years before the Empire, the Shard made their first contact with the Republic. At first, mining operations on Orax by the Republic made the Shard believe they were hostile invaders. But once the Republic realized the Shard were sentient creatures, not simple crystal formations, the mining stopped and the Shard joined the Republic. The Shard were able to communicate with computers quite well, so Republic scientists developed a droid crystal interface, allowing the Shard to be essentially linked into droid bodies, giving them mobility and the ability to communicate with other denizens of the galaxy. This gets a little strange since instead of just making bodies that the Shard could have on their own, they tend to be linked into pre-existing droid bodies and kind of work together in the body with the original droid's consciousness. One of the Shard who left Orax also turned out to be Force sensitive and took to calling herself Illum. She grew a whole family of crystal offspring, and unlike many of the other Shard who tended to go with whichever droid models were willing to host them, Illum sought out ancient deactivated Juggernaut war droids, last seen during the Great Droid Revolution of 4,000 years earlier. Anti-droid prejudice, long a problem within the galaxy, was extended towards the Shard. This applied not just to the general public's attitudes, but also, and maybe even especially, to the Jedi Order, who had specific ideas about what did and didn't qualify as life, and the Shard were seen as something of an abomination by some of them. Illum was able to find one Jedi Master willing to train her and her offspring, a master who actually sought her out because of her existence in a droid body. This was a Jedi Master named Aquinos, named after Thomas Aquinas. He was a member of the Sunesi species, who had a particular affinity for droids, worshipping a god they referred to as the Maker, believed to be whatever the droids themselves referred to when they said thank the Maker. To me, it always seemed like the expression used by 3PO was just to thank whomever created each individual droid, but I don't make Star Wars, and the people who do decided over time that this was part of some kind of underground droid religion, worshipping either the creator of the first droid or the first droid itself. Aquinos had been doing some research into essentially droid-force interfaces, and he believed that Illum could be a missing piece in that puzzle. He had always been somewhat unorthodox as a Jedi. He was trained by Master Jyn Altus, a Jedi Master who ran the Chon-Thor Splinter Academy ship. This was all from a period in Jedi lore where the Jedi Council and institutions we all know about today didn't quite exist yet, and Jedi tended to be handled on a more ad hoc basis, with a bunch of disparate groups kind of running their own academies. Aquinos took Illum and her offspring to the planet Dweem, training the Shard in an old abandoned Republic base from the Pius Day era, 10,000 years before. When the Clone Wars broke out, the traditional, less metal Jedi were shocked to find themselves fighting alongside these constructs, upon which they bestowed the epithet Iron Knights. While initially meant to be derogatory, the Iron Knights did adopt the term for themselves and for their master. The Jedi Council lambasted Aquinos' training of the Iron Knights in secret as presumptuous at best and highly dangerous, kicking him out of the Order and rendering him unable to like this video and subscribe for more. But despite this setback in relations with the Jedi Council, the Iron Knights continued to serve in the Republic military, and like most Jedi, the Iron Knights faced significant casualties during the war, but their disavowal by the Jedi Council was somewhat offset by being granted the ranks of High Marshals by Palpatine, a political move by Palpatine who hoped to gain the approval of the Coalition of Automaton Rights. This wasn't a reflection of any real affinity for the Iron Knights by Palpatine or the political establishment, and any existing public support evaporated quite quickly despite the heroism of the Iron Knights in the war, and Aquinos decided to retreat to Dweem with most of the remaining knights. Despite the casualties of the war so far, their number had grown more diverse, if not necessarily larger, compared to the original group of Illum and her offspring. Other droid types like FLTCH and Ulshos Justice droids were now mixed in with the Juggernaut war droid bodies, and a handful of the Iron Knights decided to remain in the Republic's service rather than retreating to Dweem with Aquinos. Being Jedi in practice, even if the Order refused to recognize them as such, and appearing to be droids on top of that, didn't help their public standing as the war came to a close. And who knows what anyone thought of Rox, nothing great if the angry tweets about Geoda are to be believed. The Iron Knights who remained with the Republic were among the first casualties of the Jedi Purge. Many of the Shards who served as ambassadors for Orax and the galaxy at large were included in various political purges alongside their Force-sensitive brethren. This, along with the Empire resuming the strip mining which had initially soured the Shard on the Republic, this time in full knowledge of the harm they were causing, caused many of the Shard to become staunch allies of the Rebel Alliance, taking advantage of their connection with droids to inhabit mechanical assistants of Imperial governors, admirals, and other important figures, working in concert with their also oppressed host bodies to pass intelligence to Rebel leadership. Aquinos and the others who had returned to Dweem mostly managed to avoid the fate of the Iron Knights who had remained in the war and the rest of the Jedi. Nobody actually knew where they were, so they were mostly safe. But they weren't completely beyond the Empire's reach. According to the Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia, Illum herself had returned to Dweem with Aquinos, but she was still tracked down and killed by the Empire fairly early on. Decades later, thanks to information provided to Luke Skywalker by Order 66 survivor Callista Ming, who had also had connections to the Altesian Jedi, members of the new Jedi Order were able to locate Dweem and the Iron Knights by roughly 13 ABY. The Iron Knights, as members of the Shard species, were, as I mentioned earlier, effectively immortal as far as aging goes, but even Master Aquinos was still alive. Once they made contact with Luke and his students, they were not just willing, but in some ways eager to join this new order, devoid of the anti-droid prejudices of the original, and Luke was happy to take any guidance he could get on older Jedi traditions. There were actually several of these kind of older splinter Jedi groups that had survived Order 66, which would go on to join Luke's order in at least some capacity. One of the others to do that were the Jensari, although they had a bit of a darker history. While they had finally found acceptance within Luke's new Jedi Order, in 25 ABY, anti-droid prejudice came back to the forefront of the galaxy with the invasion of the technophobic Yuuzhan Vong, who devastated droid populations on every planet they conquered and had the ultimate goal of destroying all droids in the galaxy. Among the earliest planets impacted by the Yuuzhan Vong were Osarian and Ramamul, where Yuuzhan Vong agent Na Minor instigated the rise of an anti-droid cult called the Red Knights of Life. The Iron Knights led the fight against them and in protection of droids around the galaxy, but many of the Jedi, including Aquinos himself, died in the fighting. Given their status as both droids and Jedi, it's likely the Iron Knights would have been especially attractive targets for the Yuuzhan Vong. During the war, at least one Iron Knight named Luxum was also driven to the dark side at the Battle of Kalarba, where she was fighting alongside one of General Grievous's own bodyguards from the Clone Wars, IG-179. The Yuuzhan Vong had taken Hosk Station, which was basically built around one of the moons of Kalarba, and thrown it into the planet, destroying it and a lot of life in the system. This turned out to be more than Luxum could handle, causing her fall to the dark side, although she too seems to have died before the war's conclusion. That's going to do it for our look at the Iron Knights. They don't appear in any direct stories, but honestly, they're some of my favorite side content in Star Wars. The article Droids, Technology and the Force, which introduces a lot of the information about them, has a lot of interesting discussions on droid rights, the Force, and their relationship with the galaxy. So I hope you've enjoyed this video as well. Thank you for watching, and special thanks to the channel members and patrons who make this channel possible.